Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Teaching Toolkit webinar. Today, we are talking about responding constructively to student feedback. And I am delighted to include and welcome both Kayla and Staffan. They are Student as Partners project here in Teaching and Learning, and they have been working with myself and Lee over the last while, and they have contributed to this particular webinar and indeed are prepping another webinar down the road. So, as per normal, the format of this webinar is a short presentation with which Kayla and Staffan are also going to help. They have recorded pieces in the slides. And then we will record that presentation, and then we will pause the recording, and we will open the floor to a Q&A and kind of sharing of experience. So the whole point of this webinar is to look at how it is we can respond to student feedback. And what we are going to do is, as always, we're going to use the resources on the Teaching Toolkit website. And so it's quite simple. We are looking at the process of feedback, what that means, what that entails from a faculty perspective. We're also going to get the student as partners to talk about their perspectives in terms of how they have experienced feedback, how they have experienced getting feedback. And most importantly, in terms of that responding constructively, what you and I as faculty, as facilitators can do to facilitate effective response. And this is the most important thing, constructive, effective response. So let's begin with a little overview in terms of how it is you and I might actually gather student feedback and what is its purpose. So what we're really looking at is making sure that within our teaching practice, there is an opportunity for students to have a voice, first and foremost. Maybe this is simply through discussion threads, maybe it's through open dialogue, maybe it's through something a little bit more formal in terms of actual student panels, whereby there are identified individuals or identified methodologies with which we get that feedback from our students. Now, of course, when I'm talking about feedback, I'm talking about everything from feedback upon my teaching, my ability to present, the materials I use, the activities I have designed, the socialization within the class, the support, and so forth and so on. So anything to do with teaching, learning, and indeed assessment practice. Obviously, the reason I'm saying that is because you and I normally have a couple of kind of firm points where we gather our feedback. So obviously there is feedback gathered from assignments and assessments. And obviously there's a little bit of a kind of frisson in that sometimes when we provide feedback on assessed pieces, we are only providing a final feedback, i.e. there is no formative opportunity for the student to respond to and enhance that particular assignment. So having that kind of in our process in terms of over the duration of a session or indeed a module, opportunity for additional feedback on behalf of the student is really important. What we also know from the national surveys, in terms of the National Satisfaction Student Experience Survey, which is the kind of little link at the bottom there, we know that it's really important to actually make sure that there's a full breadth of opportunity for feedback within the curriculum. And this is not simply just about the coursework and the teaching and learning, but indeed the kind of more holistic kind of side of being part of an institution. So there are lots of different levels for you and I to consider in that regard.
Hi, my name is Kayla Graham. I'm one of the SAPs working with Lee and David this year. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my experiences as a student with providing student feedback. I think that there are a lot of opportunities for you as an instructor to gather student feedback at the beginning, during, and end of class. Gathering some student feedback at the start of a session, I find can really help me get engaged. Sometimes you walk into a lecture hall and you have whatever was going on before class in your head, but taking a little time to stop and think about what you're going to be learning today. Maybe providing some answers to some pre-recorded questions or even just doing some thinking about what you're hoping to learn have been things that I have found really helpful and engaging, and again can really just help get you into that mindset of getting ready to learn and being in a space to get going. Getting student feedback during the session is probably something that I have the most experience with. Some of my favorite and most impactful opportunities where I've been able to give feedback during class or training have been probably the Think Pair shares and the colored sticky notes. I really like Think Pair shares because, especially if you're in a bigger class, it can be a great way to talk to other students. Um, and can also get you in that mode of not just being ready to talk in class, but also really having to think and listen about what your other students are saying, because you're going to be sharing that back with either a bigger group or maybe the whole class if you're doing it that way. And can also just give you a new perspective on materials sometimes that you maybe haven't had before, that has helped me think sometimes a little bit more deeply about like maybe a final project or like a bigger topic that I want to study that maybe I hadn't thought of before, and that I maybe wouldn't have encountered if I hadn't gotten to talk to that other particular student. And what I like about colored sticky notes, for example, is that it can be another way to see like what the bigger class is thinking about a topic. When I've had this in past class experiences, we maybe have had to do some pre-reading or watching a lecture ahead of time, and then coming to class with maybe some thoughts prepared, which we then put on a sticky note, and then talked through some of those ideas together, either right after or maybe in a different class session. And sometimes this can be a great way to see what the class was entire class was thinking about a topic, at the start of earlier in a class session, like early in the term, compared to maybe what they are thinking afterwards. So these are some really great other examples of getting feedback during that could be really good. And finally, you can also get student feedback at the end of a class session. I probably have had fewer personal experiences with providing feedback at the end of class as a student. Of these, the one that probably is most familiar to me would be reflective writing, which I've gotten to do in probably most of the classes I've taken at UCD so far, but more at the end of an entire class, like at the end of the term, as opposed to at the end of each class session. I have really liked opportunities to do reflective writing that I've gotten to try. It can be really helpful to take a second at the end of term when you are really busy with exams and you're just thinking about kind of moving on to the next thing, getting ready maybe for the next semester, to take a second and think about what you have accomplished over the entire term. They go by so fast, so getting to stop and think about that can really help you as a student, has helped me really realize like, oh, I've learned a lot, and maybe here's some other skills that I know I want to apply to future learning, or again, maybe areas that I didn't think about wanting to continue to expand on or study before, that now I feel like I'm interested in studying more, that if I hadn't taken that time to reflect, I wouldn't have gotten to do. And I think the potential benefit of doing like reflective writing, for example, at the end of each class session is that it kind of provides, I think, a nice cap on the learning that you've done in class. Similar to what I mentioned at this coming into a class session, you might have other things on your brain. I think similarly, sometimes at the end of class, you might be getting all your stuff together, you come into the classroom and you're immediately moving on to the next thing, and maybe not having taken the time to absorb everything that you learned. And I've sometimes come into the next class session having to kind of refresh myself on what we'd studied before. So kind of creating that time within the class session to say like, we're going to take a second to think about what we've learned here today, maybe things that you found useful or just what we've gone over, I think can be really helpful for kind of absorbing some of that material. So there are a ton of options, I think, as an instructor for when you get feedback from students. All of them, I think, have their own benefits. And as a learner, I've found that having any opportunity to provide feedback is really helpful for my own individual learning, and sometimes can also be really helpful for thinking about big picture learning that I want to do in the future. So thank you.
So thank you very much to Kayla for sharing her experiences there. So what you can see is there are a vast array of modes and means to gather feedback, and also what's important from a student perspective in terms of their participation, bringing them into that environment and giving them the opportunity, and indeed multiple opportunities, to not only reflect on what it is they are doing, but to reflect on how they are doing things, and most importantly, for you and I to gather that and to kind of understand the feedback that arrives. So, one of the key things that happens when we gather that feedback, and this is an important part of the process, is to actually kind of have a review of what exactly is within that feedback. So sometimes the feedback we do is for the benefit of the students in terms of their learning, but obviously we'd like to gather feedback upon the situation. So invariably, there are a number of things that happen. We get a array of feedback, and sometimes they are unexpected. Sometimes there's this, it was great, it wasn't great. Sometimes it's about one's effort, the commitment by the teacher, the facilitator. Sometimes there are things that are a little bit untoward in terms of around fairness and maybe even unkind comments. All of these things are going to kind of elicit a response from us. So obviously the first part of that response is the affective, the emotive side. How does it make you and I feel? Sometimes it puts us on the back step. Sometimes it makes us kind of want to, kind of pass on it altogether. But we have to kind of grapple with those emotions and try and think that through. Think that through in terms of a productive response. What is it that I could do differently? How is it that I can respond to this in a productive way that will actually change, have impact, and most importantly, and here's the most important thing of all, is to communicate that change back to our learner. So this is the feedback loop that we'll come to momentarily, to make sure that if I've gathered feedback, if students have taken time to do so, provide it with me, that I respond in some productive way. So let us move on and just kind of talk about making sure that when we actually are in the mode of creating feedback opportunities, that we're thinking about it from a partnership perspective, i.e., it's not just about me gathering feedback for my purposes and my purposes alone. It is to enable the learners to feel that they are part of the situation that is teaching, learning, and assessment, that they have a voice that can be heard, and most importantly, again, as I say, acted upon. So consequently, as Kayla nicely pointed out, there are different kind of modalities at the start of a presentation, start of a seminar, within the middle, the body of it, and indeed at the end, a kind of assumative piece in terms of feedback. So integrating that into our practice, integrating means and methodologies for students to engage and provide that opportunity for feedback, not only for themselves, but for ourselves, is really important. Most importantly, and hopefully this is quite clear, is that we are all kind of working together. So I am here not as only a lecturer, a presenter in terms of being in front of my students, but as a facilitator, a co-learner, a kind of a guide along the kind of pathway of the module, the program that it may be. And what I mean by that is that we have these shared goals that we're working towards. And it's really important to kind of communicate that. And communication is the most fundamental thing to make sure everybody knows that there is going to be a response to the feedback. When we talk about triangulated data, we're just simply saying that there are different modalities. So not only will I get kind of feedback from the assignments that people do in terms of how effective they've completed them, and in terms of how I might kind of provide feedback to them about how better to enhance that, but I'm going to get feedback about in class by simply having students in class and participating, seeing them undertake activities, listening to them asking questions, and indeed interpreting what kinds of questions those are. Is it because they're asking questions because I haven't explained something fully, or is it because they're asking questions because they're leaping ahead? They're kind of following on in what we're doing. So all of that is really important to consider. Consider in terms of making it a really effective modality. So I've mentioned this feedback loop. It's about communicating that we are going to do it together in partnership. It's about engaging in a process, as Kayla has pointed out, multiple variations therein. But most importantly, that's my catchphrase for the day, isn't it? Most importantly, is thinking about evaluating all of that content that we might get back and how best to deal with it. And how best to deal with it is we simply communicate back again. Thank you for the feedback. This is what we're now going to do. The other piece to remember, and it's alluded to in the big image on the right-hand side of this slide, the timer. Making sure that we provide and respond to feedback in a timely fashion is really, really essential. If we aren't able to kind of respond effectively and time in a timely fashion, then everything that our students give us back has no meaning. So making sure that we give time over to this process is really important. So I'm going to hand over to our other student partner. This is Staffan, and he's just going to talk about a little bit about the staff feedback side.
Hello everyone, I'm Stefan. I am a student in Masters in Business Analytics and I'm working with Lee and David as a student partner. So today I'm here to give my perspective on the closing of feedback loop, which is a very crucial aspect of effective teaching and learning. So for this loop to be truly effective, it's vital that we as students receive feedback on the general feedbacks we provide. So this means that after we share our insights on teaching methodologies and content delivery and also how the class interactions are, we would like to know what actions are being taken to address our concerns. So according to me, there are three reasons why this is important. First thing is transparency and trust. It builds trust and transparency between student and faculty when we see that our feedback is valued and acted upon. Second thing is that it improves the learning experience. So when we understand how our feedback is being used to improve the course, we feel more invested in the learning process. And the third thing is empowerment, knowing that our voices are heard, our feedbacks are being valued, that would empower us as learners and encourages us to continue providing constructive feedbacks. So how can this be achieved? So first thing what we can do is communicate the action plans. So faculty can share summaries of key results and actions taken based on student feedbacks through emails, announcement, or even in class. So this is one way that can be achieved. Another way is that we can include updates in course material. So information on improvements made based on student feedbacks can be included in course prospectus or even in the student handbooks. So I would say that by closing this feedback loop and communicating the impact of student feedback, we can create a more collaborative and effective learning environment for all. Yeah, thank you.
Let us come to a conclusion. So just to kind of highlight, there are different modes of the feedback loop and how you might actually kind of put it in action. There's the obvious kind of procedural thing that you and I will do, but I'm just pointing out on the slide here, we have on the Teaching and Learning Toolkit a number of kind of examples of how you might actually do that and different kind of ways to actually design feedback loops and making certain that there is action and transparency about how everything happens and really kind of focusing on that partnership and collaborative endeavor. So have a look at the website and the resources therein. You will find lots more explaining the feedback and indeed different kind of modalities in terms of technology use and the assessment record and so forth. That ends today's presentation. We'll shortly stop the recording. Just highlighting the next session is Cultivating Belonging in the Classroom on the 20th of March. We look forward to seeing some of you there.